Hello and welcome to the Biology Career Insights, the podcast where we talk with experts from the field of biology to gain valuable insights into the careers and explore ways to navigate the job market in this ever evolving field. I'm your host, Dr. Manish Kumar. Today, we're joined by Dr. Kiran Dhillon. Dr. Dhillon is the Executive Director of the Cancer Vaccine Institute at the University of Washington in Seattle, USA. She has a PhD in genetics and completed postdoctoral training at the Fred Hutch Cancer Center, where she studied the genetics of chemotherapy resistance in breast and ovarian cancers. She was formerly the director of scientific programs for the Rivkin Center, where she oversaw funding for ovarian cancer research and supported a breast and ovarian cancer community education program. As executive director of the Cancer Vaccine Institute, she currently oversees organizational strategy and operations to facilitate the development of treatment and prevention vaccines for breast, ovarian, and other solid cancers. Thank you so much for joining us today, Kiran.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to speak with you.
Amazing. So, to start with, can you tell us a little bit about your background and about your current role?
Yeah, absolutely. I knew, I'll start from when I was really young. Like when I was 4 years old, my grandfather told me, Kiran, you're going to be a doctor. And I was very excited by this prospect. And I kind of, all of my education from that really young age, I just always was drawn towards science. And I was always very curious about how the world worked. And so I moved to the United States when I was 9 and to the West Coast of the US, where I had the opportunity to join a program where I was able to take college classes through high school. And that was really fun because I got to explore a bit deeper biology than I would, in high school. And even along that time, I thought I would want to be a medical doctor. I mean, that was my initial thing, but I didn't have any actual experience working with patients and any kind of clinical experience. And also, I mentioned the journey of the, moving from India to the US. And that process of being an immigrant, also, I think I became a little bit more shy than I am now or than I was before. And when I did decide to get some clinical research experience, I worked as a phlebotomist for a couple of years in a lab. I realized that I was a little shy and I didn't enjoy the clinical environment. And I was like, oh no, what am I going to do? But at the same time, I really enjoyed studying human disease. And so I decided to pursue a PhD, and genetics was my favorite course as an undergrad, and came to the University of Washington and studied a really rare disorder called Werner syndrome, which is the characteristics are premature aging and cancer. And so, after that, I really enjoyed the work. I learned a lot about DNA repair and its link to cancer, and also how we can exploit it for developing new therapies, and the role that changes in DNA repair genes can have in resistance to drugs. But I wanted to move a little bit away from basic science. So I did my postdoc at the Hutch, where I was studying more patient samples and patient data on chemoresistance and breast and ovarian cancers. And all of that I enjoyed, but I realized, I think pretty quickly, that doing bench research day in, day out, or even looking at what my colleagues who were faculty and more senior were doing, it wasn't everything that I wanted to do. And while at the Hutch, I started getting involved in leadership roles. There was this student postdoc association that I first became involved in and then became the chair. I helped found an organization that helps promote the success and retention of folks, scientists who come from underprivileged backgrounds, who are underrepresented in sciences here in the United States. And those two things gave me the experience of how do you build programs, and how do you build programs that meet the needs of science and scientists. And on the side, and I mention this because I think it's so important for everyone to have a hobby or a side hustle. My side hustle was I was organizing film festivals. There's a local South Asian film festival, 10-day festival. I started as a ticket collector, ended up being festival director. And that sort of was a way for me to do something different than science, but it also inspired me to start organizing scientific symposia. Even as a postdoc, started doing local symposia. And so it's really strange how something that seems totally different really kind of I brought the skills I learned there into what I was doing in science. So I was still a postdoc, but I was finding all of these other things that I enjoyed doing. And my friends would tell me, why are you so distracted? You're doing all these other things. But the reality was that's what made me happy, is to do science and do all of these other things where I was connecting with people and bringing people together. And then so ultimately, another thing happened while I was studying chemo-resistant of breast and ovarian cancers. I myself was diagnosed with breast cancer at the time. And so what I was doing became so personal, and I also became really interested in working in advocacy and working with patients to help integrate them better into research and elevate kind of their needs as well. And so, as I was wrapping up work there, I had the opportunity to join this organization called the Rivkin Center for Ovarian Cancer. And I chose this organization because it was focused on ovarian cancer, not breast cancer, which I had been dealing with. Just, I have enough expertise and it's distant enough from my own personal experience. And I joined there as the director of scientific programs. And I got a chance to network with ovarian cancer researchers all over the world. And I realized how powerful it was. These kind of roles aren't necessarily kind of talked about, or even as folks who work in academia, they're not necessarily even valued. But I realized pretty quickly how powerful it is to be kind of a gatekeeper for research, at least at some level, for this community, and to be able to develop programs that really help push this research forward, organizing scientific, national scientific, international scientific symposia, where, as organizers, you have the power of kind of shaping some of the conversation that happens. And to me, it was just amazing. And as a social person I am, I just would love going to conferences and learning about different research that was going on and integrating other ideas and really learning the needs of the community to develop programs at the center that were going to address those needs. And then, as you mentioned, I was also overseeing their breast and ovarian cancer education program, and I had the chance to work with a lot of breast and ovarian cancer patients and survivors and help get information out to the general public that was scientifically sound, because as I'm sure you know, there's a lot of misinformation out there that could help people understand risks and signs and symptoms. And so people also feel empowered to go see a doctor when something is wrong, and empowered to know their body and pay attention to their body. So that was personally fulfilling for me because of my own personal experience as well. So it's been interesting how my personal experience really has become integrated into my career as well. And our scientific advisor when I was at Rivkin is a person named Dr. Nora Desis. And at some point, I became aware of this opportunity of being an executive director here at the Cancer Vaccine Institute. So my training is in genetics. I am a geneticist through and through. And I was very nervous about, what am I going to an immunology organization? What is this going to be like? And am I going to be an imposter here? But it's been amazing. I've been here for almost 3 years, and the organization needed somebody who could wear a lot of hats. And not only my role is some of it's internal facing, how do we kind of determine our strategic priorities? How do we organize ourselves around that? How do we streamline our operations and other efforts to be able to achieve those? Even though we're an academic institution, we're set up in many ways like actually, at least a small company in that way. We really pay attention to bringing in business practices, management practices that are academics usually ignore, but we really pay attention to that to make sure that our team is taken care of. And then externally, I spend a lot of my time working with the philanthropy team here at the University of Washington to talk to donors, to talk about our story and coming up with a strategy of how are we going to bring in philanthropic and foundation funds to support federal grants that we do? So a big part of that, and actually even my role at Rivkin, is science communications, is being able to help people understand what we're trying to do, the importance of it, and what the long-term impact is. And so I spend a lot of time thinking about how to communicate information that is, I think, often scientifically complex in a way that people can consume. And I work actually a lot with our internal managers to help them increase sort of the connectedness of the organization. And one of my goals has also been to shift organizational culture where people do feel more connected and everyone feels valued. Everyone knows what the mission is. Everyone knows what their role is, and that they matter. I joined the organization during COVID. Over the last year, I've had the chance now to actually travel more and try to help build partnerships with foundations and potentially other organizations at conferences and things like that, and which I just love. I think pounding the pavement at a conference and connecting with the scientific community, the advocate community, and others is it's something that just brings me so much joy. But that's my background. I don't know if that's kind of what you were looking for.
No, amazing. As I mean, it's not only, the curiosity for science that you had. I think you were also at later part of life driven by a mission, like your personal health condition and everything, I think motivated you towards, going in that direction, which is quite inspiring. So, Kiran, my question to you, the next question to you would be, I understand that you were like very curious about pursuing science, but did you have a visibility of what you ended up becoming, at the beginning, or, at what point of time you realized that, this is something that I want to pursue? When did that transition happen? And, because there are many PhD students, also at a very confused state, whether they want to pursue science or they want to pursue something else. And they think they are the only ones confused. Perhaps you can highlight your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there were a couple of points in my journey where I had to question what I was going to do. One I mentioned where I thought I was going to be a medical doctor. And a lot of that was because my exposure, I didn't have any PhDs in my family, but we had doctors, right? I mean, this is common in the South Asian community. So I knew what that was. And, everyone goes to see the doctor. And the only exposure to researchers, to scientists that I had was as professors. And I did a research project as an undergrad, but it was more of a library research project and not an in-lab. So that was one decision point where I pivoted from what I thought I was going to do. But I will tell you, when I showed up to graduate school and I met some of my best friends that I've ever had, and I still have, I realized that this is where I was meant to be. I had found my tribe. I've been looking for these nerds my entire life, and I finally found them. People like me who saw the world in a different way. And those friendships I have are deeper than, any other friendships. So that was one where I was like, okay, I think this is good. I made the right decision. Of course, it was challenging. But now, as sort of my career progressed and I shifted away from research to doing other things, administration, leadership, I'm not even sure exactly what to call it. I think I was following my own instinct of what made me happy and what brought me joy. And that was doing science, being involved in science, and a lot of other things. And my postdoc was longer than the average postdoc, but while I was there, I helped create a lot of new things, a lot of new programs, and that for me was also training that you don't receive as a postdoc. How do you, as we were founding this organization, we were presenting in front of the CEO of the Hutch, in front of the senior vice presidents. How do you pitch your idea, and how do you get buy-in from people? And then to execute those ideas, you have to work with all kinds of different departments within an organization that are not in a lab and that you almost would never have access to from a lab. And I just saw the power in that, and learned, oh, this is how you make things happen. And I found that to be really powerful. So, mostly I just sort of followed my instinct and or found what made me happy. And I would say I had a realization that I talked to a lot of people about who are thinking about careers just about myself as a person probably 4 or 5 years ago. So, pretty deep into my career. And that was that, like, I don't think I ever would have been successful as a bench scientist or as a faculty member. I think you have to be really happy working in a narrow space with a lot of depth, right? Like that's what science is. You're an expert in this little space, but you have very deep expertise. I am what you would call a generalist. Not only, I think working on one problem for a long time would just, I just wouldn't be able to do it. I would get bored. So I really liked doing a lot of these different things. And I realized once I learned of this term that I was acting on just because of what made me happy, kind of developing enough expertise in different areas to be effective or dangerous, whatever you want to call it, and to be able to kind of connect all of these different worlds, science, administration, communication, all of the stuff. And initially, what I saw as, oh, is this a distraction? Am I just easily distracted? I realized it's actually powerful because not everyone can do that. And so I started to see it as a strength. And that, I think, realizing that has helped me kind of move into the types of roles that I have, because I have, for even my past role as director of scientific programs at the nonprofit, or here as executive director, I have to wear a lot of hats and I have to be able to switch between a lot of different things. I have to be able to get, deep into the science, or talk to the fundraising team, or talk to a donor. And for me, that's really fun, right? Like, I just love that. And it's also one of the hardest parts of my job, right? It's like I get to do it because I love it, but it's also so hard because I really have to be aware of a lot of different things and to code switch into many different spaces.
So, Kiran, for a layman, how do you explain your role as an executive director for vaccine research or Cancer Vaccine Institute, for example, and
Yeah.
and not only that, and how does your work impact the scientific community and the broader public? If you can, highlight those points.
Absolutely. So, what we're trying to do here, as you mentioned briefly earlier, is to develop vaccines for the treatment and prevention of cancer. And we are working on vaccines that in the United States affect or include 50% of new diagnoses and 50% of the deaths. And that includes breast, ovary, colon, bladder, lung, prostate. And these are all solid tumors. And so we're set up in a way where we have a technology that we know that we can develop vaccines that elicit the right kind of immune response, which is known as a kind of very inflammatory, tissue destroying immune response. And we're using that technology to develop vaccines that target multiple proteins across these different cancers. And that's sort of our general goal as a team, and the organization is set up like this. But to be able to do that work, we need to have funding. We need to take care of the team. We need to communicate our work to the general public and connect with other collaborators. So my job as executive director is really to kind of help us stay on course of, we're going to stay focused. This is our strategy. This is how we're going to stay on course. And then seeing what are the internal operational pieces that are needed to make sure that we're doing what we're doing. So my hands are in every part of the organization, and I do whatever it takes to keep things forward. Recently, I've been the PR person. I worked a lot with our media relations team as we have studies that come out. Connecting with media to either talk to our leadership team or talk to media myself, whatever it is to help tell that story. So one of my biggest jobs is to really help elevate the profile of the entire institution and our scientists to be able to really help us achieve our mission, what we see as a cancer vaccine moonshot, to take our vaccines to the clinic, which we run our clinical trials, but then hopefully to approval for use for anyone who needs them. So that's broadly what I do, and everything I do is linked to that mission. I'm also I would say the team motivator and therapist, whatever you want to call it. And I kind of talk about big picture and vision stuff when I talk to the team to make sure everyone you're in the weeds and you're doing your thing that you do every day, but make sure that people are still see how that's connected to our broader mission. And personally, for me, it is really important to do mission-based work, and everything I've done has been involved in that, whether it's my paid job or whether it's volunteer work. And so I think helping people connect to that and motivate them to keep going. And we're dealing with very difficult problems. So that's another big part of my job, and that's linked to what I mentioned earlier, creating a culture of a more positive culture, and where people feel motivated and feel valued, and feel that they're contributing to not just their experiments, but how they're contributing to this larger cause of developing these vaccines for people. So, and then one other piece that I do, which I did mention before, is we have a lot of patients who've been through our clinical trials. So I built a patient advisory council to help them engage in our research. Some of the federal grants that we write here in the United States ask for, or sometimes they don't even ask, but we like to include patient advocates as members of the team who would hear updates and can provide input. So I work with this group to do this, and we're also trying to address kind of more broadly, the impact on science. So of course you can imagine the impact of developing vaccines on broader society, but we're also trying to deal with other issues such as, in the US, and I'm sure other places, there are significant disparities in access to cancer care and cancer therapies for certain groups of people in the United States, African Americans, Hispanics, other minority communities. And so we're trying to, in clinical trials, notoriously, at least here in the United States, they're not very diverse. It's usually Caucasian folks who are who sign up for these clinical trials. So we're trying to increase recruitment of diverse communities so that not only do people have access, everyone has access to potentially cutting edge therapies, but the data that we're generating are more reflective of the general population. I was very aware when I was receiving treatment that pretty much everything that I was receiving was tested mostly on white women, for breast cancer in that case, or white men too, I guess. And so that's a personal thing, but also a value here in our organization. And in the same vein, the vaccines we develop are DNA vaccines. So these are more stable at room temperature and cheaper to make, which is different from a lot of the neoantigen vaccines that are out there. I won't go into the science, but developing these types of vaccines allows them to be taken off the shelf and given to anybody who fits a particular cancer subtype, right? And it's a lot cheaper, and we hope that also helps address some of the disparities that exist in cancer research. So those are a few of the different areas that our work has impact nationally and internationally as well.
Amazing. And Kiran, if you were to suggest, say, students, who want to acquire, different skill sets to kind of perhaps become what you have become, so what would your advice be for them?
So two things, right? One is be curious about other people and their careers, right? Ask people who are doing different things, how did they get there? So here we call them informational interviews, and most people, I do them all the time with people. Students reach out, or somebody reaches out, and as I progressed in my career, I've also asked people to reach out, right? And that is important not only to learn about other people, but it also helps you develop a network. And having a strong and wide network will always come in handy, where people will ask you for favors, and I almost always say yes, because it might help somebody, and you never know when they're going to help you, right? Don't look for a benefit from that one interaction, but just kind of broadly, help other people in your network. And don't start networking just when you need a job. If you're looking for the next job and you're like, oh, I need to now network, it's too late, because it takes a long time to cultivate those networks and be authentic, about that. I'm trying to think back to the second thing I was going to say. Remind me of the question again.
Yeah, but I think that's a great point that you made,
Yeah.
that networking is not like asking for help, but it's about cultivating relationships,
Yeah.
so that
Yeah.
you both are likely to help each other in
Absolutely.
in
Yeah.
times of
Yeah.
need.
Yeah.
um
The other thing I was going to say, the second piece is say yes to different opportunities. Get out of the lab And I say this for people who are interested both in academic careers and non-academic careers, because nobody, even if you want to be a principal investigator or faculty member somewhere, you do not learn how to manage people as a postdoc. You do not learn how to manage budgets. You do not learn how to, get approval from but it's assumed that you're going to pick up those skills. So I think it's really important to say yes to different opportunities. In my case, it was the Student Postdoc Advisory Committee. They asked me to do a couple of things, and then eventually I was the chair of the committee for 2 years. And I remember the first meeting I ran, sitting around a room with 20 people that are looking at you for leadership. I was nervous, first couple of times, but I realized there's a skill, there's a method to do this. And those kind of unpaid volunteer opportunities were so helpful in kind of, what and helped me get to where, I was trying to go. One of the other things I used to do, like for science communication, especially, like I cannot emphasize how important being able to meet people where they are in their understanding of what you're trying to do, what you're trying to tell them is so key. I took a lot of opportunities to kind of develop those skills. I used to do the new employee orientation. So new employees at Fred Hutch, both people who do administration, who might do facilities engineering, and scientists were required to do an orientation, and they would invite a scientist to come talk about their work. And you had to talk enough science that the scientists were interested, but lay folks could also understand what you're doing. And that really helped me figure out how to talk about my work in a way that was accessible. And in fact, slides that I made for that talk, I realized there's no reason that when I'm presenting to my fellow scientists, it needs to be as complicated. It really shaped how I communicated to scientist colleagues as well. And I did actually an internship with a business development office where I was writing summaries about research to be pitched to potential investors or people who would license that technology as well. So, find these different opportunities that exist. And I guess the last piece of advice I would give is don't wait for opportunities to come to you. You are the driver of your life and your career. So hold on to that steering wheel and figure out where you're going to go. And it requires work on you. Even if you have mentors, mentoring it's a two-way thing. You can't go to a mentor and have them expect for them to tell you what you need to do. Like, you have to do a lot of thinking on your own and really drive your own life and explore what different possibilities are. Those are the nuggets of advice I like to give younger folks.
No, that's great advice, I must say. And Kiran, moving next, could you describe some of the biggest challenges you face in your work as an executive director, and how do you overcome them?
Yeah, one I mentioned, which is that I have to really, I have to wear a lot of different hats, which I have a lot of different roles. That can be challenging, and it's also a job where there's nobody telling me what I need to do. I have to figure out my priorities, but that's something I enjoy and I like to do. So, I just try to be a little bit thoughtful and plan of, what it is that I'm trying to accomplish. But sometimes, one of the other jobs is I have to manage people, and people are very challenging, as we're all different personalities, and how do you navigate those sometimes difficult conversations on whether you're helping someone that reports to you with their team or talking to somebody else. That can be really hard. And so I've just taken training as much as I can. And one of the things that I do, I mentioned bringing in practices that are used in other industries, whether it's management or organizational strategy. I talk to a lot of them here in Seattle. This is a very tech-heavy city. Microsoft is here, Amazon, all of that. So I have a lot of friends who lead teams in tech, and I've spoken to a lot of them on especially management related topics. And how do you use, for example, there's philosophy of using objectives and key results as a way to manage your strategy, all of this. So just learning from other people. So, and like for me, I'm happiest when I'm learning and when I'm in a space that I've never been in before, even though it's really hard. So yeah, there are times where you have to have very difficult conversations, but I really like solving those hard problems that most people don't like, especially when it comes to interacting with people and managing people. There's some weird joy I get out of working in those difficult situations, but yeah, I mean, it's a lot of new stuff, and luckily I'm in a place where my boss, Dr. Desis, we have such a great partnership. She's the director of the scientific director of the institute, and we have trust in each other. And basically she's allowed me to have this be a playground where I do bring in different approaches that are used in tech. And we know not everything is going to work, but it's kind of fun to be able to experiment in that space.
Amazing. Now I think, I'll switch gears a bit. Perhaps you can tell us about the most exciting developments in your field right now, and how do you see the future of, your field?
Yeah. So one of the most exciting things that's happened, so we have many vaccines, many different DNA vaccines that target various kinds of cancers, and they're in different stages of clinical trial. Our largest program is in breast cancer, and then in both lung and ovarian cancer, we also have clinical trials that are for all three of those diseases in phase 2 clinical trials. And this last fall, one of our first DNA vaccines, which targets the HER2 protein, which is found to be amplified in about 30% of breast cancers, and actually in many other kinds of cancers, including endometrial. We had data from 10 years after vaccination that got published. And what we found was that for advanced stage breast cancer patients, for mostly stage 4 and a few stage 3, from the 3 doses we tested, all 3 had immune responses that were specific to the vaccine. And for the best dose, 85% of advanced stage cancer patients are still alive 10 years later. For the other 2 doses, that number is 75%. It is so encouraging to, and it was one of the first DNA vaccines that was out there. So we did have to do a long follow-up of 10 years, but to be able to report those results, the response has been overwhelming. And it's really, that vaccine is now in phase 2 trials that's recruiting in many different places internationally. And it really, I think, was very motivating to see those clinical results. And we have other studies that are starting, completing maturation and then moving on to the next phase. So I am so optimistic, both as a scientist and as a cancer survivor, that the vaccines will have a huge impact on cancer care. The other important thing is, we look at, chemotherapy is no fun. And there are a lot of toxic side effects, as with other types of therapies as well. And the vaccines are very safe. The most common side effects are similar to what you would get from the flu or COVID vaccine, and they resolve within 3 to 4 years. So, swelling at the site of injection and some fever, things like that. We really don't see toxicity from these things. So we're very excited. And, initially the earlier studies were looking at folks who had just finished treatment, had, low level disease or no evidence of disease, and vaccinate them and look for, can we prevent the cancer from coming back, or can we basically, increase the progression-free survival in these patients. Now we are starting to use them actually in the neoadjuvant setting. So when patients are diagnosed, they receive chemotherapy before they have surgery. In that setting, a couple of our vaccines are being tested. And our hope is that we're able to adapt some of these vaccines to the preventative state. So for patients who have high risk for breast, ovarian, and other cancers because of family history or known genetic mutations or other factors, that those folks, or people from mammograms who are known to have a precancerous state called ductal carcinoma in situ, those folks can benefit from receiving the vaccine to potentially prevent disease. The way the prevention happens now is that they have a bilateral mastectomy often, and which is a very aggressive and drastic method. So we're looking at prevention, and not just that. I talked about, we've developed a method that helps us develop vaccines that really destroy cancer tissue, right? Because we know how to do that, we also know how to do the opposite, which is to suppress inflammation. And so we're using that technology to develop vaccines that can reduce, for example, inflammation that comes from fat tissue, which can lead to hypertension, diabetes, and breast cancer. So can we develop a prevention vaccine that targets a cause of cancer? And same thing for inflammatory bowel diseases that can lead to colon cancer as well.
Wow. So clearly there's a lot of things happening in your field. And that brings me to the next question about, how do you stay up to date with these latest developments in your field? And what advice would you give to biology students who want to stay informed in this field?
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the ways is to read papers. And I read papers relevant to cancer vaccines. I get a, weekly report sent from PubMed. I'm not sure if you all use that in Europe or not, but PubMed and other sources on specific topics. And I at least skim through that. One of the things that we do here is we have subscriptions to actual paper journals that come in, and everybody kind of compiles the different journals we have, and they get put in our mailboxes. Once you're done reading it, you give it to another person and sign off that you've seen it, which is great because you not only get kind of depth in the area of your field, but also potentially kind of related things that are happening as well. The other piece is, attending talks, right? So both locally here on campus, and then also going to conferences. I think conferences are great. You can pick and choose about areas that you're really interested in, and then you can get exposure to totally different areas of research. And it's kind of fun to be like, oh, I want to learn about this, I'm going to go and attend this session. And also the cool thing, the reason to go to a conference in addition to that is like being fully immersed in a kind of broad topic, right? Maybe it's just an ovarian cancer conference, maybe it's an immunology conference, but they're still fairly broad. That immersion and the kind of conversations that you have with people who are attending, I think it's really powerful in helping shape how you see things, and you get a sense of, oh, these appear to be the major problems, or this is what people are really concerned about. And that's really hard to get just from papers. So I really encourage that. The other thing, my PhD advisor, one of the most amazing things about him was that he encouraged us not just to go for talks in our field, but we were in genetics, go to a biochemistry talk, go to a pathology talk, go to an astronomy talk, whatever, right? Like, and in those talks, you take notes and you probably understand the first few background slides. Everything else is, could be a different language. But I always found that it inspired me to think about my own work in different ways. And I often had some of my best ideas happen while I was listening to talks on something totally different. So read, go to conferences, talk to other people. That's the advice I would give.
And I can vouch for that because I met Kiran in a conference as well, right? And that's how we became friends. Yes. So I
And we've
remember that.
connected ever since. It's been 10 years. We've interacted through various science networking things. And an example of someone who's in your network that you cultivate that relationship, and here we are.
Absolutely. Kiran, finally, the most interesting part of the whole podcast is, a lot of biology students, be it bachelor's, master's students, or even PhDs, they are very much worried about their careers, right? So what would be that one advice that you would like to give them? And secondly, are there any career resources that you would recommend them?
Yeah, so the piece of advice that I would give, so one of the things for me personally that has guided my own journey is I see very few things as failure, right? When you engage in science and in scientific careers, often you're taught this is the path that everybody should be taking, right? And clearly I have not taken that path. But for me, at each step, even while I was figuring things out, I used every opportunity I had, whatever I was doing, to learn. What am I learning from this? How am I growing, in this role? And the second piece of advice, so for me, you define your own success, right? Like I don't see it as, oh, I'm trying to get to this point. I see it as this is my journey and it's going to be really interesting, right? The other piece of advice that I actually got many years ago, or I learned many years ago from a friend, from a volunteer opportunity. She was much older at the time. She was in her late 60s. And she would talk about her life and, oh, when I was in my 50s or 40s or 30s, and I realized that we have a lot of opportunities to reinvent ourselves. So just because you're doing something now, it doesn't mean that doors are closed for you to do something totally different, whether in science or not. And I think it requires a little risk. It requires, to be uncomfortable, but really magic happens in sort of that unknown space. And you can try something and you totally hate it. And so, I would think not of like, oh, this is what I want to be when I grow up, but what do I want to be next? And I will be honest, I think some of my cancer experience also informed that, where I think I probably take a few more risks of my current side hustle is I paint, and for that took a lot of courage to be like, oh, I'm going to lean into that as a serious hobby, and am I really going to do this? Am I going to do an art show or whatever it is, right? Like, it's just an example of like, I'm assuming new identities at any stage in life. Like the possibilities are infinite. Don't limit yourself. Just because you're doing something now doesn't mean that you can't do something different next. So, and don't think of it as just sort of like, this is it. This is I'm locked into this. So yeah,
Absolutely.
many chances to reinvent ourselves. And I think it's so fun. And even things that are failures, see that as an opportunity to reinvent yourself. What version of you do you want to become next?
Yeah, that's a great points, Kiran. I mean, especially I like the thing you said about, success. Don't be kind of, um, fooled by, somebody's definition of success. Success is very subjective, very individual, and, everybody is successful in their own kind of way. So
Absolutely.
that, yes. And about reinventing, about taking the courage to reinvent yourself, reimagine things, is, I think, a great career advice. Are there any career guidance, resource that you would kind of recommend the students, Kiran?
So one thing I did do, and I think maybe it was the National Science Foundation here, a national organization had many years ago while I was a postdoc, there was a survey where made for scientists or maybe postdocs or students, where you kind of do a little reflection and assessment of what your skills are and what your interests are. And I wish I remembered what that survey is, but I think there are many tools out there like that,
Mhm.
that you can find. And because sometimes you may not even, because you're so focused on science, you don't realize, oh, how these other things you're doing outside of science could potentially have impact on you in a career in science as well. So I think reflecting on that, and then actually finding people who are nodes in networking connections. And for me, there was somebody at Fred Hutch who has been a mentor to me for a long time. She sort of saw the scientific development for postdocs there, and she's been a link to help connect me with many different resources. So whatever institution you're at, look at what's available, and many institutions have those resources. And also, if they don't exist, create them, find them, don't wait for it to come to you, go find it. And if it's not at your institution, there might be national or international resources. For example, for postdocs here in the United States, there's a National Postdoc Association that has a meeting every year. And it's great. It's a lot about professional development and a lot of topics that are related to postdocs, career development. So look out for those opportunities, and like I said, don't wait for them to come to you. Go find them.
Absolutely. And I think one of the aim of doing this podcast is also to add to these resources, which are like, as you mentioned, I think there are limited resources, but I think, we should take the responsibility of adding to those resources, which will help the larger community.
One of the things that I had access to is when I was a postdoc, there used to be this lunch and learn kind of session where they would invite a different person who worked in non-traditional careers, so not in academia, come and talk about their journey. And what I learned from that, it wasn't any specific information from any one individual, but it was that there is no straight path. Everybody had their own path to get to where they are. And I think that relieved a lot of anxiety for me, early on, where I was like, okay, I got to figure out what I'm going to be. It was like, it's fine. Look, this person did this, and they did this, and they did this. So, again, going back to the informational stuff, learning about other people, I think is also a great resource as well. And then, actually also having mentors that can help you. And there are two types of mentors. Some are mentors that can, will give you advice. And then there are other mentors, which are more called as sponsors, that not just give you advice, but can help open doors for you. So it's important to find, you should always have mentors, and those mentors will change as you progress in your career because your interests change. So I think that is also really important, and they can help guide you. At all of these different points in your career, you have to make a decision, right? Like, and having someone with more experience, or kind of even just having had more time in the industry or whatever it is, can help you see the pluses and minuses of any particular decision that you're trying to make.
Wow. So Kiran, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And for the students, thank you for tuning into Biology Career Insights. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast to get the latest episodes delivered straight to your device. See you next time. Bye, Kiran. Thank you so much again.